Hey guys, welcome to episode 3 of our Lab Up series. Today we're going to get our computer joined to the domain that we created. We're going to set up our first Dhcp server. We're going to build our first Dhcp scope. And then I'm going to show you guys how to set up IP helpers on our router so that we can allow that broadcast traffic to traverse in order to obtain a DHCP address. And then I'm going to show you how to reserve that address in DHCP. Stick around. Alright guys, to recap, this is the third installment of our lab series. To recap the first two, we were able to create a simple topology here, a LAN with internet access. We're using EIGRP to redistribute routes. And in the second video, we went ahead and integrated VMware virtual machines into the topology. So today we're going to take it a step further. I've already went ahead and promoted DC01, the VM, to a domain controller and created a new forest or domain, root domain that is, of unicorn.local or a unicorn. So again, I encourage you, if you're not familiar with creating domain controllers, to check out my Active Directory series. I linked that in the second video, but you can easily find that playlist. Just check out my channel. So yeah, today we're going to go ahead and get the Windows 10 machine joined to that domain, and then we're going to set up DHCP. Let's jump right in. I've kind of moved everything off to the left there in GNS3 just so we can see the topology while working with the VMs. So let's check out the Windows 10 machine. And first thing we'll need to do, guys, is change his DNS and his IPv4 settings to the address of the domain controller. And after we set up DHCP, this will be a little easier. It'll configure itself, so to speak. But for now, make his DNS server 10.10.10.100, which is the IP address of our domain controller. And then from there, we're going to want to join him to the domain. Okay, it's Jedi PC01. Let's go ahead and change that here in GNS3, just so it reflects. Make sure we got that accurate. 1 second. Jedi PC01, that looks good. Alright guys, now to actually join it to the domain, we're going to need to go to the advanced. There's a couple ways to do it, but this is one. Rename this PC advanced. And then we can go ahead and hit change here to rename computer or change its domain. We'll leave the name and then we'll join it to the domain. In my case, that's unicorn.local. Whatever you named your domain, you're going to want to put that there. Now I have to use a domain account in order to join the domain. I've created a domain admin called Unicorn because I'm so original. Give that a second. And behind the window there, welcome to the unicorn.local domain. We'll hit OK. It's going to want us to restart. I'm fine with that. Let's go ahead and reboot. We'll give that a second, guys. I'll pause. Alright, it's booting back up. Once this does come all the way back up, we should be able to log in with that Unicorn domain account. Just going to let this come all the way up and get a cup of coffee here. I'll be right back. Okay guys, the coffee cup is full and the Windows 10 VM is booted. Let's see if we can log in with that domain account. So if we go to other user, we now see sign in to Unicorn. So that'll be the domain that you're joined to, guys. You can use whatever name you want. Feel free to use Unicorn. I think it's a pretty sweet name. So we'll use that Unicorn account that I created. And look at that. We're logging into the Windows 10 VM that's integrated into GNS3, authenticating against the domain controller, which is also integrated in GNS3 through our virtual topology. Pretty sweet. We'll give this a second to load up while I load up on coffee. Alright guys, that didn't take long. Let's go ahead and check a couple things here. Oops. We can do that later. Alright, so we see our DNS is set to our domain controller. I'm sorry, that's our default gateway. Let's do an all so we can see our DNS. Okay, there we go. DNS server is set to 10.10.10.100. We're still configured with the static. We're going to fix that in a minute here. And we see that our primary DNS suffix is unicorn.local. So now when we look for DNS resolution, we're going to traverse the GNS3 topology, and we're going to go up to this guy, DC01, and he's going to feed us back those DNS results. So if we do ns lookup google.com, we see that the address shown here under the ns lookup is the address of our DNS server, also our domain controller in this case. And he is going out to his configured public DNS servers, which are the Google servers, and then feeding back those results. So he's basically just doing an ns lookup on our behalf. I hope that makes sense, guys. So again, now we're logged in with a domain account, and we still have internet connectivity, and everything's working fine. So let's go ahead and move on. Let's jump over to the domain controller, and we will get DHCP set up. Let's get logged in with that domain account. Alright guys, so in order to configure DHCP on the server, we're going to have to add a role or feature. So we're going to go into Server Manager to do that. Here's a pro tip for you guys when you're working with servers. If you don't want Server Manager to pop up every time you log in, just go to Manage, go to Server Manager Properties, and say do not start Server Manager automatically on login. If you're in and out of servers all day, you're not going to want to see this pop up every single time, I promise. Alright, so now we're going to add a roller feature. Next. This is the only server we have. We can manage multiple servers from one, but this is our only one in this case. And then we're going to add DHCP Server. Again guys, this is obviously a lab environment, but you could easily have multiple servers, and then you could create DHCP failover, so you have highly available DHCP scopes. If that's of interest to you guys, let me know. I can walk you through that. It's very straightforward. You just have to have 2 servers. Alright, we'll go ahead and get that installed. I'll pause and come back when this is done. Alright guys, that install has completed. Go ahead and click on Complete DHCP Configuration. We're going to use the following credentials. That's fine because this is a domain admin. And this is just basically authorizing the DHCP server in Active Directory. Creating the security groups, authorizing DHCP server, done and done. We can close that out. We can close this out. Now we should have a RSAT, not an RSAT, we should have an actual administrative tool for DHCP at this point. Let's go ahead and open that up. And we're going to want to create a new scope. I'm going to do one for our VLAN 20, 10.20.10.10.0. That'll be a /24. Because that's how we configured it on the router, a /24. Alright guys, we're going to do a new scope. We're going to call this VLAN 20. And you can have your own standards here, guys, but I normally will carve out a block and exclude that from the lease scope or the range of distribution for the scope. And what I mean by that is the addresses that the scope is able to hand out. It just depends on what your needs are, but there's, there are times still in this day and age where you need static IPs. So I'll carve out, the first 20 or the last 20, however you guys want to do it. In this case, I'm going to do the last 20 because our router's .1. I'm sorry, I'm going to do the first 20 because our router's .1, and that automatically takes it out of that range. And again, guys, that way we have some statics. If a vendor comes in and needs a static or something like that, they're there. So what we'll do is we'll configure 10.20.10.21 to be the start, and we'll say you can go ahead and hand out all the way to 10.20.10.254. 255 obviously being the broadcast address there. That's a /24, and that'll automatically fill in the mask. Next. So here's where you can add in some exclusions. We don't need any in this case. Again, there's different ways to do it, guys. You can set your distribution range up for the whole /24, and then you can make exclusions here. It just depends on what you're doing. There are scenarios where the right thing to do is set an exclusion. That's more when you're migrating and you have some old reservations that would fall outside of the range of your distribution. If you were gonna carve out, I think I'm getting in too deep here, guys. In our case, we don't need any exclusions. Okay, standard lease time of 8 days is fine with me. I want to configure the standard options now for DHCP. Yes, I do. And we're going to set our router here, guys. So this is going to tell the clients, hey, this is your default gateway when you obtain an address from me. So obviously in this case, we're going to look at our topology, guys. VLAN 20 correlates to our fast Ethernet 1/0.20 sub interface, and that router IP for that sub interface is 10.20.10.1. So obviously we need to put that in here. It's the only router we've got. That's fine. Parent domain looks good. DNS servers. We're going to go ahead and remove these, and we're going to put in 10.10.10.100 for our DNS server, which is our it is our DHCP server, also our domain controller in this case. Next. Win server. If you guys are using Wins, it's going to be the same as your DNS server. We can plug that in. I don't think I'll be using any NetBIOS. We can use NetBIOS names. That's fine. Again, depends on what you're doing here. Obviously, this is a lab, guys, so it's not going to hurt. Oops, I don't think I added that. There we go. Matter of fact, did I add? I didn't add the DNS server there either. There we go. Make sure you click add, guys. I just went back and verified that. Okay, do you want to activate the scope? Yes, because you can create a scope and leave it unactive. Only time you really do that is if you're preparing for something. Maybe you have to get change control to activate it, or maybe you're migrating and you're just doing the preparation work ahead of time. You can leave things unactive. In this case, we're going to activate the scope right away. Finish. All right, guys, there we go. We've got our first active DHCP scope built on the DHCP server. Not too bad. Okay, guys, so the next thing we need to do is we're going to set this guy to DHCP, but if we do it right now, the broadcast packets, because let me take a step back. When you ask for a DHCP address, you go through a process that I call DORA, and that is the series of events that happens to acquire a DHCP address. So DORA, it's a discover from the client. He sends out a discover broadcast packet. He says, hey man, who's got DHCP? Hook me up. The DHCP server, if that broadcast packet can make it to the DHCP server, will offer an address if he has one available. Then the client will receive that offer. He'll say, looks good to me. I'm going to request So we did our DOR, right? Our discover, our offer, our request. And then he'll send that request packet back to the DHCP server, and then the DHCP server will say, I acknowledge you. You can have the address. We're good. All right. So then he has an address. So again, guys, that's Dora, like Dora the Explorer. Backpack, backpack, you know. If you have kids, you know. Anyways, yeah, so that's the process. The reason I bring that up is because this is a router, right? By default, routers will drop broadcast packets. That's their job. They separate or segregate broadcast domains. If they were on the same subnet, the broadcast would traverse and hit that no problem. These are on different subnets, different VLANs. So what we need to do is tell that router, hey, we know this guy, he's cool, help us get to him, okay? And I'll show you what I mean. Let me crack open the console here. So what we have to do, I was already kind of prepping, but I didn't hit the command there so I can show it to you guys. We need to go to the interface where we're actually going to configure that. In this case, it's going to be the sub interface. So I'm already in config mode, but I'll back out. So conf t interface fast 1/0.20. So that's the sub interface for VLAN 20, which is where we're going to set up the DHCP helper. So we'll get into configuration mode for the interface, and then we need to do an IP helper dash address, and then put in the address of the DHCP server. There you go. Save your config. Always save your config. Okay, so now if we go back, that command should have allowed the broadcast packets to traverse the router and forward over to this VLAN or this subnet. So now let's go back to our Windows 10 and let's see if we can set up DHCP and successfully acquire an address. Change adapter settings, properties, IPv4, properties, obtain automatically, obtain automatically. Let's see what happens. Well, that was rather non-suspenseful there. It was pretty quick, but let's see if it worked. Boom. Just like that, guys. 10.20.10.21. And you'll notice that he got 21 because when we set up our pool, our DHCP distribution pool, the first address that we were allowed to hand out was 10.20.10.21. So if we look at our lease, we go to all, excuse me, lease obtained just now. It's early in the morning. Couldn't sleep on this Saturday morning here. And the lease expires 8 days from now. Alright guys, so that is how you set up DHCP and how you allow the DHCP requests to forward through a router. Because again guys, excuse me, by default those DHCP requests are going to be dropped at the router. Because what does a router do by default? It drops broadcast packets. It separates or segregates broadcast domains. That's one of its many jobs. So we added the helper address to the interface that correlates to the VLAN or the subnet where we're trying to obtain DHCP. After doing that, we were able to successfully obtain a DHCP address from the domain from the DHCP server, which in this case is also the domain controller. One last thing I'll show you guys is, since we're marking our IPs here, I'll go ahead and change this. But this is dynamic, so if we were to shut it off and fire it back up a few days later after that lease expires, in this lab we'll probably get the same address because there's no one else using that VLAN right now. But in the real world, if you wanted to maintain the same address, we would do what you call a DHCP reservation. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so we're going to say DHCP reserve because we're about to do that right now. Let me show you what I mean. So back on your domain controller, which is also again our DHCP server, we're going to go to the scope that we created. We're going to look at our leases. This is the only lease we have. We're going to right click and we're going to say add to reservation. lease converted successfully to reservation. So what does that mean? That means every time this machine checks in with DHCP, he's always going to get this same address. And it also means when any other clients check in on that same subnet on this scope, they will not be able to obtain that address because it's already reserved for this guy. So it's kind of like a reserved seat. You're always going to sit in that same spot and no one else is allowed to sit there. Alright guys, that was episode 3 where we walked through setting up the DHCP server. Well, first we joined a Windows 10 machine to the domain. Again guys, if you need to check out any videos on setting up the domain controller and promoting it to a domain controller, things like that, check out my series. I linked you that on video 2. Again, I've got a whole playlist here on my channel for server administration. So we set up the domain controller. I did that offline. Then we joined the Windows 10 machine to the domain. Then we set up DHCP, built our first scope. We added the helper address to the router, and then we obtained a DHCP address on our Jedi PC01, and then we reserved that on the domain controller. Alright guys, our lab is growing right along here. I think I'm going to add a couple notes here. Sounds like the baby's up. Okay, this will be the DNS server, DHCP server, and domain controller. Let's put that right there. Alright guys, I'm going to wrap this up. I got to go get the baby. So yeah guys, check out my next installment. I'll have it up soon. I think we might integrate an ASA on that one. If not, I've got a couple other ideas of what we can do, but I'm looking for some feedback. What do you guys think so far about the lab? What do you guys want to see integrated in this lab? Let me know guys. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. Until the next one, take care.